The day Richard Miller turned 72. He sat on his porch swing and stared across the street at a neighborhood that didn't look quite like the one he'd moved into 30 years ago. The trees were taller, the lawns more perfectly edged, and the people, well, the people had changed more than anything else. Familiar faces had faded into retirement homes or cemeteries, replaced by young couples with hybrid cars and toddlers in high-tech strollers. Richard, once a bustling mechanical engineer, had retired a decade ago with high hopes for quiet, peaceful golden years. But what he hadn't expected was how quickly people forget you when you stop being useful. His phone calls became rarer. Invitations disappeared. Even his own son, Jeremy, a fast-talking tech executive in Denver, visited maybe twice a year, always glancing at his phone more than his father. But it wasn't the loneliness that stung the most. It was the betrayal. 5 years earlier, Richard had taken in his younger brother, Tom, after a heart scare left him unable to work. Tom had always been the irresponsible one, drifting from job to job, relying on charm and borrowed money. Still, Richard had offered him a room, food, and dignity. It was what family did. Or so he thought. Tom had repaid Richard's kindness with deceit. He convinced Richard to co-sign a loan for a small business venture, some online storefront that promised big returns. Richard, ever trusting, agreed without much thought. 2 years later, the business failed, and Tom disappeared, leaving Richard to deal with creditors, frozen bank accounts, and a ruined credit score. It had been a hard pill to swallow. Richard didn't go public with it. He didn't sue, didn't chase his brother down, didn't even tell Jeremy or his friends at the local diner where he sometimes joined the morning coffee crowd. He kept silent. He endured. But that silence wasn't weakness. It was power. One cold January morning, while nursing his usual black coffee, Richard got a call from a number he didn't recognize. Hesitantly, he answered. "Richard." Came a familiar voice, weaker than before. It was Tom. I need help," Tom murmured. "I'm in the hospital. Miami General. Liver's failing. They don't think I'll make it through the month." Richard didn't speak. He let the silence stretch. Eventually Tom spoke again. "I messed up, Rich. I know I did. But, you're my brother." Richard finally exhaled and said, "I'll pray for you, Tom." Then he hung up. For weeks he thought about that call. Not because he felt guilty, but because something in him had shifted. The pain, the loss of trust, the months he'd spent piecing his financial life back together. It had all carved him into someone wiser, someone quieter. He told no one about the call. Not even when Tom passed away a few weeks later. The obituary was short. No surviving spouse. No children. No accomplishments listed. Just a name and dates, and a generic funeral time. Karma had handled it. Richard didn't gloat. He didn't attend the service. He just sat on his porch that day, watching the wind play with the trees. 3 months later, another test came. Across the street lived a couple. Derek and Sandra. Young, ambitious, loud. Derek was the kind of guy who saw older folks like Richard as speed bumps. He'd once yelled at Richard for taking too long at the community mailbox. Another time, he backed his car over Richard's recycling bin and denied it, even when the footage from Richard's security camera proved otherwise. One afternoon, Richard heard a knock at his door. Derek stood there, looking pale and nervous. "Hey, I know we haven't really talked much, but do you still have that camera pointed at the street?" Richard nodded slowly. "There was a hit and run last night," Derek explained. "Someone sideswiped my wife's car. The cops think it happened around midnight. I was wondering if, maybe your camera caught something." Richard knew it had. He'd watched the footage that morning and had clearly seen the neighbor's teenage son from 2 doors down trying to park his dad's truck and misjudging the distance. But Richard wasn't going to rat out a kid who clearly panicked and drove off. He stared at Derek for a moment, then said, "Didn't catch anything." Derek narrowed his eyes. "Are you sure?" "Yeah," Richard said calmly. "Sorry. Karma would handle it." By spring, Jeremy came to visit with his teenage daughter, Lily. It was one of those rare weekends when Richard actually looked forward to company. They sat in the living room, talking about how much Denver had changed and how Lily was learning to code. Jeremy, though, seemed distant, impatient. "Dad," he finally said, "I've been meaning to talk to you. About the house." Richard raised an eyebrow. "What about it?" "You've got a lot of equity in it. And I've been talking to some advisors. Well, we were thinking maybe a reverse mortgage makes sense. You'd still live here, but it'd free up cash. For your medical needs, for emergencies. And well, maybe help with Lily's college." Richard listened silently. It wasn't the first time Jeremy had floated the idea. And every time, it sounded less like concern and more like opportunity. "I'm fine," Richard said simply. "Dad, you're sitting on a gold mine and barely using it." "I'm using it just fine," Richard replied. "I sit on the porch every morning, read the paper, and listen to the birds. That's what this gold mine is for." Jeremy looked frustrated but didn't push further. After they left, Richard went into his room and locked the safe where he kept his will. He'd recently updated it, not out of spite but out of clarity. He left a fair portion to Lily, who always brought him books and never asked for anything. The rest he donated to a foundation for retired veterans. Jeremy wasn't mentioned beyond a polite note. He didn't call his son to explain. He didn't warn him. He stayed silent. Let karma handle it. Later that year, a strange thing happened. The young couple from 2 blocks over, Macy and Brian, started checking in on Richard. Macy, a nurse, would bring him soup when it snowed. Brian offered to mow his lawn. They didn't ask for anything. They didn't act like saints. They just saw him. When Richard asked why they went out of their way, Macy said, "You remind me of my granddad. He passed last year. But he taught me that older people see everything. They just stop talking after a while. And that's when you know they've really learned something." That stayed with Richard. He hadn't become silent because he was bitter. He was silent because he no longer needed to fight to be heard. He saw people for who they were, some kind, some cruel, some confused. And rather than spending his energy fixing them, he let the world teach them what he no longer had to say. Karma wasn't some vengeful spirit. It was time, truth, and patience. Years passed. Richard's health slowly declined. Macy and Brian helped him set up a medical alert system. Lily visited more often and even brought her college roommate to meet the coolest grandpa in the world. Jeremy called once in a while but never brought up the house again. One rainy evening, as Richard sat by his window watching droplets streak down the glass, he felt a deep sense of peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because he had finally learned the rarest lesson of all. Some things don't need to be avenged, explained, or shouted into the world. They just need silence. Because in the end, karma doesn't shout either. It just arrives. Quietly, naturally, and right on time.